we will conduct this session in Chinese. So for those of you who need to listen to interpretation, please put on your headsets. Thank you. Okay, all set. If you require interpretation headsets, could our staff help those who need to listen to the translation? Thank you. Shall we start? Welcome to this session on China's millennials. This concept, millennials, is borrowed from the Western world. In China, millennials means those born in the 1980s and 1990s. Looking at the interior era, China started QQ service in 1999. In that specific year, Chinese young people have started using their online ID, and they would be able to communicate with their friends, family members across region, across multiple cities. So the aboriginals of Chinese netizens dated back from the 1990s. So say you were born in 1980, that in the 1999, in that period, you would be a high school student and you would be highly influenced by the internet age. In 2014, about 2 years ago, I started a media channel, Xiaobo channel, which is an IT-based channel. So for that channel, which is branded in my name, I dropped into a major panic. I am a financial editor and writer. My readers would be those born in the 1950s and 1960s. And at iQIYI, when I created this channel, iQIYI ran a major data survey through Google. And they surveyed and found that 60% of my readers are those born in the 1980s and 1990s, that is, China's millennials. And I was totally surprised. And I took a look at another set of data. There are 2.5 million to 2.8 million entrepreneurs emerging every year. And most of them are millennials. Several years ago, I did some research with Zhou, which is the largest chain store budget hotel chain in China. And I found that 80% of the customers are those born in the 1990s. Again, millennials. So most young entrepreneurs are millennials. Floating population. Most of floating population in China are millennials. So millennials definitely have a big impact on consumer pattern and the wider society in China. And they are a major consumer group. iQIYI is one of the largest video platform in China. And the majority of their consumers are millennials, and these millennials are willing to pay money for knowledge. And Mr. Zhou Yuan, founder of Zhihu, is present here, and he's very familiar with that fact. These millennials are ready to pay for knowledge. And today in Chinese households, 5 generations coexist. Those born in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s and 90s. So people from different generations contribute to economic and social progress in China. And panelists present here are born in the 60s, 70s and 80s, especially a lady who happens to be a millennial herself. So could you share with us your perspectives on the millennials, especially their impact on the consumer trends in China? So let me introduce the panelists to all of you. On my right-hand side, Professor Zhang Lifen, Professor of School of Journalism of Fudan University and former editor-in-chief of Financial Times China. And so we graduated from the same school. So you are my we're alumni, and he's really. He really is quite he saves money by paying me the lowest fee to my columns. On my left-hand side is a famous is from a famous online game company, Robert Xiao, CEO of Perfect World. Mr. Xiao used to be an executive of companies like Dell, and in 2008, he joined a totally different world of online games. On my right-hand side, someone who is born in 1989, and Daisy Guo, co-founder and CEO of Tezign, based in Shanghai, which is a design company. Welcome, Daisy. Daisy has produced a movie before called Daisy the Ghost. And on my left-hand side, Mr. Zhou Yuan, CEO of Zhihu, one of the largest online Q&A platform in China. So 3 of them are born in the 1960s, and Daisy is born at the end of the 1990s, early 1980s. So a lot of people in the audience are born in the 1970s. Excellent. Have a great mix here. Let's start from the panelists. We have people engaging in computer games, in online Q&A platforms, online communities. So could you help us define how you are different from the millennials, and how the millennials impress you in the most unique way? Today we are gathered here to discuss the millennials. Well, I feel like an elderly person talking about youngsters. There is only one actual millennial present here on the podium. That is Daisy, and she's the minority on the podium today. I get in touch with millennials all the time, including my interns, my colleagues, my students at Fudan University, whom I teach. Well, this is a Western concept, millennials. But in the Chinese context, I think Chinese millennials are unique in their own way. They have several characteristics. First of all, they have their own historical memory, historical identity. They are free from hunger. They have no memory of the Cultural Revolution. They have never experienced a time when there was a starvation, hunger, social stagnation. And the millennials grew up in a time when China was going through an economic boom. So they are the lucky generation. But on the other hand, sometimes I was thinking this generation suffer from a major loss of memory. So if we put them in this context, we would understand why they think of their career, social networks in certain ways, and how they look at their social values and life values. This afternoon, I just Baidu'd China millennials on the search engine, and I knew this article was written by someone born in the 1940s or 50s, because the writer put it, the owner of a restaurant, the owner of a company would first tell the millennials, why I'm asking you to do this thing, and he has to spend 20 minutes doing the explanation. I feel pity and sympathy for the millennials. So I'm dressed in the same way as the millennials would dress themselves. Thank you. Professor Zhang. Professor Zhang's point is very interesting. As someone born in the 1960s, I would never belong to the millennial generation, but I try to put myself as close to the millennial generation as possible. So I'm trying to mimic this millennial generation, whereas Professor Zhang refuses to do that. And in my life environment, during my work, both at the front end and back end, I run into millennials customers, at the front end, my customers are millennials. So if you look at their interests and look at the things and services they want, these millennials differ fundamentally from their older generations, earlier generations. The things they want, the things they pursue, and the way they grow up are totally different from our generation. At the back end, which are the product and service providers, are my employees. By the way, the average age of my workforce is about 26, 27. Millennials again. That's the average age for most Chinese internet startups. And by my presence there, I increased the average age of my company. So when they create products and services, their way of thinking is quite different. For example, they are not afraid of authorities. Those born in the 80s or late 70s would be very respectful towards their bosses. They speak in a soft, gentle way. When there is disagreement, they would consider the feelings of their bosses. But when we have debates with those millennials, especially those in the 1990s, they would openly say to their bosses, "You have no idea. You don't understand this. Here's what I think." What if you really don't understand as a boss? Then why you are the CEO? Of course, I'll be very frank and open and say I really don't understand this issue. Of course, the millennials would not openly say that I, as a CEO, should quit my job. So on the whole, their attitude is they're anti-authoritative. And this is very important. This attitude is important for the innovative industry. The way in my head, as I create a product or a service, might not be relevant for the front-end customers. So I have to use a different approach in managing employees born in the 1960s and 70s. In my Xiaobo branded channel, I created a doll for the millennials, a toy doll. There is a name I use, Hua Zhe Lei. Have you heard of that name? No, I have not. Is this a plant or an animal? Can someone tell him? This is the name of the lead, of the male lead. Maybe those born in the 60s, 70s have never heard of it. Yes, it's the name of the male lead in a major TV serial. So after this incident, I have decided that I will never edit the text written by the millennials because I don't understand your I don't understand your language. I don't speak your language. I work in the art design, creative industry. As a creator, Tezign platform. Well, this is a platform created for myself. Let me give a bit of background here. Why don't you do it? Tezign is a startup company. We would help companies hire freelance designers on demand. Why do I create this platform? I created from the Central Academy of Fine Arts, which celebrates the spirit of freedom. For the graduates from my college, we don't care about unemployment. What we care about is my lifestyle, whether I will be able to do yoga at 3 p.m. and I will be able to do some work at 8 p.m. And then at 10 p.m. I would log on to Zhihu and make some extra money. And I can do a live broadcast of how I eat, how I work, and how I sleep. Yeah, I think if you do a live broadcast, you can make a lot of money. And I can buy products designed by my friends, including jewelry, clothing, and shoes. Also, I know my friends love a major male star, a Korean star on iQIYI, and I can send her gift cards to you access iQIYI video library. So let me ask you, what does a discipline mean to someone born in the 1990s? Discipline to us means,
without compromising the big principles, I have to be after a sense of happiness, my own sense of happiness. So individualism and collectivism, which one is more important? As a business owner, I have to look after the company's bottom line, but I want to make sure that I have balance between what I want and what the company needs. So at my company, I have a big responsibility for recruitment and managing people. So I spend a lot of time talking to my peers because many of my new hires are millennials. So I have to talk to them. There is still work and life balancing what you do. So you don't have to work 40 years, 20 years for me, because I can't promise that my company will survive that long. And you can't be that loyal to us, that's for sure. So let's say for a year or two, we could work together, and let's work together to make sure you get what you want and the company wins. It's a very private question, what you just asked. I think knowing yourself is a function of people's perceptions of you plus what you think of yourself. So, Mr. Zhang, you're out, right? Compared with the Y generation and the millennials, I see myself very similar to what they how they have behaved. What about you and your daughter? Let me leave that question aside. I think an interesting observation is for the Chinese millennials, between them and their parents, when it comes to investment, their commitment to the country, the way they spend money and the way they shop, it's really very different. In the Western world, probably the generation gap is every 15 years, but in China, it's probably every 5 years. Well, I got this a lot. So I'm born after 95. I was born after 95, not before. So they made that distinction, granular distinction. And I have observed that the millennials don't want to work in one place because it's a disgrace to them. So changing a job within a year or half a year is nothing to be ashamed of. Well, and also I can spend. I can have deficit spending. I can spend and I earn money and I spend again. So many people tell me that, Professor Zhang, you are really out. Within our HR committee, we have a specialized group dedicated to managing issues related to the millennials. So this has to do with structure. So that's very interesting, right? Zhihu is like Korra. It's the Chinese equivalent of Korra, and it was built by the millennials. When we talk about the X generation and Y generation, so those who were born in 85 to 90 are the active users on Zhihu. They were the 600-seat users. And so what's the distinction between the early adopters and the common users? Last year, we have done a campaign, so we try to collect the troubles of young people. So what is your trouble? That was our question. What's your trouble? My trouble is, I hope I will be able to understand the millennials as quickly as possible. What about yours? My interest is in knowing how the millennials want to use our service. What about yours? My trouble is probably about my love life. My parents, my mom wants me to get married soon. You're still young. What about the Y generation? So what were the top troubles? Number one is about being a drifter, being a migrant. So the Y generation, the millennials, go to Beijing and Shanghai to work, but they liked it. So the first trouble is drifting, and the second one is poverty. And poverty is not about themselves, but about other families. When you were studying, you thought that this boy is going to have to do great things when he grows up, but it's not. And also about their parents. If you are working in Beijing and Shanghai away from home, what do your parents do? And how do you plan your future to make sure that you don't get into this vicious circle of earning money in order to get married, but you won't be able to marry until you have a house and enough savings? I think this is the same set of troubles, right? Because when we were young, we also had this trouble about wealth, about my trouble is the kid next door looks very much like my kid. So number 4 is responsibility, and number 5 is about life planning, career planning. As millennials, I think their biggest difference is that they are talking to their parents. They are speaking to their parents. So what? So something we think is reasonable and conceivable is to them very alien, very unimaginable. I think we have to divide them up. So some had to do with growing up with dopamine and with a lot of passion and rebellion. The other group has to do with the rise of the middle class, the explosion of population, and also the demographic difference. So in the 90s, they were born in the time where material comfort became more important, so they had very little memory of poverty. So you have to distinguish which memories are have to do with the years in which we were born and which are not. My son was born in the UK, so his son is always saying, "You Chinese do this." That's one big difference. So I mentioned 2 memories about childhood, about poverty. So the millennials don't have any memory of poverty because they were born in a materially comfortable time. And also because of the many choices they had in life, they were able to grow up, become more self-absorbed, and they took individualism very importantly. And also, they didn't have what the parents had in terms of social mobility. When they were young, they probably already went abroad for the first time. They already had similar experiences with kids from New York and London. It's just a click away. They could talk to them. So it's a whole new world. What about in the gaming world? Your users, your gamers in China, are they different than those in Europe and the US? Because a game is played internationally. So do you think there is any difference in their consumer pattern, consumption pattern? I think it has to do with a local trend, what is in a particular country. That's why in a gaming title, their behavior will also be shaped and conditioned as such. Games are flourishing everywhere, but I think people play games not out of boredom. Do you think game can change people's life? Let me ask you this question. Do you think NBA or playing basketball can change your life? It's a competitive game. Competition came along after human being came into life. Well, the way you appreciate a certain sport is probably similar to the way you play games. So it's just about putting your passion into one type of activity, playing games or playing sports. I think we are experiencing similar stuff. I think what concerned you as children also concerns the children of this generation. It's just the educational context and the experiential context were different. When we were young, the education we received was quite distorted. I have to admit that. And people of my generation know that as well. And because of internet and China's rising wealth, now the consumer philosophy of the current generation is very much altered. They like to spend, and the things they shop are very different. For example, they want to play games, and we want to play basketballs, similar to that. So they are very globalized. What stimulates their consumption behavior, they will go for it. So I think the 60s and 70s were about piracy, and the 80s and 90s about innovation. I think we're all touching our nose. Daisy, you said that you told your employees you don't have to stay with the company forever, because I'm not sure whether the company will survive 1 year after this. So just be committed for now. So when he joins your company, those millennials, those designers working on your website, they may change jobs very quickly. But what's their level of commitment to a profession? So they may become actors if they are not committed. Personally, I think they are very committed to their profession. They want to spend many years to do something right. I think they have that because we were told we need to look for what is important to our life. So we didn't care for the poverty you were referring to. My poverty is I don't have enough pocket money. I don't have enough savings in my bank account. But it's not about feeding yourselves, making a living, that type of poverty. The designers we work with like design. So our platform provides freedom for them to focus on design, and they don't have to look after the finances, the legal aspect, and also about communicating and engaging with customers. So we do it for them. And they want to buy that type of productivity with us. So they are willing to pay for the commission that we charge. Also, we are now born in the sharing economy. Our social networks are Facebook, WeChat. Our knowledge sharing is on Korra and Zhihu, because I myself read Zhihu almost every day. There's a lot of original content on that. So it's not like registering an account and we hide ourselves and we just leave it be. So we focus on original content, and we want to make sure the users of Tezign will be able to see the excellent designs and designers we have, so that after sharing, they will be able to spread the word instead of being copied. On Zhihu, do you think different people of different ages focus on different sets of topics, or they can focus on one common topic? So which is more common, people focusing on different things or focusing on the same?
It's a combination of both. For the same topic, people from different generations and from different technical backgrounds may have different opinions, so they can have a debate. And also there is the phenomenon you have just described. People born in different generations will have their own grouping of debate They only care about the topics that are relevant for their generation. So there are communities and mini sub-communities. So I think the two phenomena you have just described coexist on our platform. Just now, Robert has talked about the consumer trends, consumer patterns of different generations. Many people are critical of me within my company because they think I'm rude, I have bad manners. Well, for you, when you will be in your 30s, when you can afford a car and apartment. Well, it's really scary for those millennials. They would shop from different 8 or 9 different brands. When I ask my colleagues to go out and eat, they would immediately throw me a lot of questions. Where are we going to eat? Who's the chef? What's the specialty course? What are the raw ingredients? I think these questions don't matter for people in my generation. When we invite millennials to go out and play, well, we would have a visit. We would visit the family of those. We would visit homes of millennials. I think they have exquisite kitchens. They have a premium quality kitchen utensils. I have done some math, just as Professor Zhang has said. For the millennials, their parent generation will be those born in the 60s, and they would benefit from the results of China's economic reforms initiated by Deng Xiaoping. So they have no idea. The millennials have no idea of saving for the future. So they will not be able. They do not need to be responsible for their future. Do you really care about saving for your future? Well, for my generation, I can't speak for others. For myself, I don't save just for the purpose of saving. I spend because I will be more motivated to make money, work to make money. So making money or spending or saving, which is more important? Spending is more important for us because I'm contributing to China's consumption. That's great. That's why you are contributing to China's economic prosperity. Well, when I setting for the college exam, I try to study Chinese in college. But my teacher told me you should be a journalist because once you graduate from the journalism school, you become a journalist and you start making money straight away. So let me ask you a question. For your students in the School of Journalism at Fudan University, how many students really want to read journalism, study journalism because they are interested or because they want to make money? Well, one reason is China is full of opportunities. And second reason, in the current society, for both parents and students, there is the diversity of choices for everyone. So when I work with my students, I have found that in the eyes of my students, responsibility first means they should make themselves happy. For the millennials, their personal happiness is the most important thing. And they have a different understanding of what success means. Just now, Daisy mentioned they have different interests in life, different priorities in life, different from our generation. And also, we shouldn't forget, China started the economic reform and opening up policy in the 1978. And the millennials, most millennials are only child of their respective families, which is very unique in China, different from the Western countries. So China's millennials are a unique generation, and they are under huge pressure. They have to take care of their parents and grandparents. And in today's age, this parent and grandparent generation have long life expectancy. So for Zhihu and other social media platforms in China, in the last 10 years, especially in the internet age, the adoption of IT is unprecedented in China compared with the rest of the world. And China has the one of the most the deepest adoption of IT. My relative's child asked a question when he saw a telephone line. Why there is a cable connected to the telephone? He only knows about cell phones. And another kid found someone waving at a taxi to be a strange animal. Why is it necessary to wave one's hand at a taxi? Well, that is because of technology and the change that technology has brought about in our life. And this has brought about a fundamental change in China's modern society. Today, we're discussing China's millennials. Especially in metropolitan cities, millennials are the most privileged group who benefited the most from China's economic reforms. Still, they are the minority in China's society, and that would lead to the misconception that in Tier 3, Tier 4 cities, especially in rural areas of China, kids born in the millennial generation do not enjoy the same privileges. In rural China, access to information is basically the same for kids in metropolitan cities. Recently, I have read some news report about some love story. A young, handsome young man who has broken the heart of his fans. And many people believe that this is simply wrong. It's a bad behavior. Do you think that's a godly behavior? Well, those born in the 1970s would never understand this. Why do you think, why for the millennials, you would think of him as a living God? Well, he's so handsome that he can just live. He doesn't have to work, and he can live with just his pretty face. Say your son. For example, your son has slept with his hero or the star that he admires. What would you say? Compared with my generation, China is a totally different society. Human relations, the way we tolerate human relations is totally different. And in today's China, our society is even more open than the days when I studied in the UK many years ago. In China today, there are social restrictions in so many ways, and yet China enjoys excessive freedom in other areas. This is such an interesting thing. Xiaobo, you have a daughter. Suppose your daughter has slept with the star that you admire. I also have a son and a daughter. And what if your son or daughter retorts saying, "So what?" Well, the three of us happen to be the father of a millennial born in the 1990s. So if our kid says, "So what?" I have a different strategy. My daughter only calls me when she needs money from me. That's basically what happens. My daughter studies in America. You are so lucky. And your son studies in Britain. That's how I communicate with our child. Let me tell you a true story. I know two mothers. The daughter tells the daughter says to the mother, I want to put on
另外一个妈妈说啊，你要去
I want to tattoo my belly button. I want to tattoo a flower on the belly button. And the mother, this is one mother's story. Another mother says, I want to go together with you. I also want to tattoo a flower on my belly button together with a daughter. What is your attitude? I also want to wear the same tattoo as my daughter. My daughter not only asks me for money, but also asks me for my photo. I think I'm not a handsome man. I'm really surprised that my daughter will ask me for my photo. My daughter would answer, well, my schoolmates are interested in knowing who your father is, because your father is the CEO of a computer games company, and we love your computer games. And I asked my daughter to give me the names of her schoolmates so I can enter their names into our database and they can become my customers. So I try to put myself in their shoes to understand their feelings and their needs. And in my life, when I get close to this millennial generation, I become younger, and the products and services I provide cover the millennial generation. Daisy, when you go out on dates with boyfriends or girlfriends, do you care about their parent background? Say, do you want to know whether the parent is the CEO of a computer game company? Do you think you should marry someone from the same social footing, social status, and financial status? Well, I don't care much about that, but I care whether we share the same values, whether we have the same interests, reading the same books, or share the same hobbies. We have a Global Shapers organization under Davos Forum, and I'm responsible for the Beijing hub. There are also Shanghai hub, Manila hub, international hub, and we care about NGO topics. We care about the earthquake in poor areas, and we want to contribute to those regions and to the resolution of those issues and challenges. Whether this boyfriend or girlfriend comes from a rich family, that doesn't matter to us. So young people have diversified interests. When I travel to Taiwan, I'm really disappointed. Their TV channel is full of coverage, reporting on party politics. In China, we have an open society with open social relations. For example, on Brexit, if you take a look on Zhihu, those millennials have had extensive discussion on Brexit. I haven't analyzed the Brexit discussion data, but the Brexit discussion chapters have been going on for quite several days. And these discussion forums was initiated by the users themselves, including those living in the UK and international students studying in the UK. They would share their opinions and the opinions of their English professors, British professors. So the good thing is that while Brexit or the referendum on Brexit is going on, we involve opinions from all stakeholders, and we can engage opinion holders from multiple fronts, and this can be a good exchange of opinions.
For those born in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, about issues of public interest and politics, is there a difference in terms of their level of interest? I think people who were older like to see the outcomes. So they care about the ends, the outcomes, because they are related to their life, they have a bearing on their life. There's a lot of public debates on Zhihu. So people would think how we react and how others react. That's very common for us. But how that was developed and whether there's room for improvement, people don't really care. So I think on the issue of fear, is there a difference between the older and the younger? I think they fear different things. The older people, I'm not sure. Maybe death. In addition to being dead, what else do you fear? I fear many things because I think the world has evolved in such a way that there's a lot of fragility, there's a lot of anxiety. Our generation, compared with the millennials, has one big difference that we try to fulfill something meaningful in painful times. But the millennials want to live in happy times and they want to do it with the minimal level of efforts. That's why my kids always say, so what? Because they said, you fought all your life for this, but that meaning of doing that is probably little. So they want to spend minimum effort to do something great. And people who were born in the 80s are worried about the possible downside risk of the future. They don't care about now. As long as I make an effort, as long as I have games to play, then I can look forward. For the younger generation, they probably are more worried about now, whether I can buy and shop now, whether I can have my needs met now. For example, the Japanese cartoon is a very good example. It's one way of telling whether you are new, whether you are young, or you are old. There's a ninja cartoon in Japan. It's about a group of pirate-like ninjas. And many people in China watch that. And at the beginning, the protagonist is very weak, and he plays to upgrade to improve himself. There's another cartoon series which is also gaining popularity. It's called Silver Soul, something like that. So have you read it before? It's also a Japanese cartoon, and it's very popular among the young people. The cartoon series tells the story of aliens landing in Japan, and they destroy the martial spirit, samurai spirit. So what do the protagonists do? I think it should happen that we try to fight back and we get a samurai spirit back. But in Silver Soul, it does not work like that. They want to fight, but they are not fighting. They are thinking that you are interfering with our life, and that's the reason we want to fight. So I think when it comes to the young people and the old people, they have a preference. The young people have a preference for the means as well. So they are more pragmatic, they are more realistic. I describe the Chinese society today as a short memory society because it moves so fast, so we have a short span of memory. And for the people born in the 70s, they were considered prehistoric animals and beings in the eyes of the millennials. So that's very interesting because the millennials don't have that much baggage, but it's also unfortunate because they don't see things we saw. They have many blind spots. But this is also giving them lack of fear, so they can move forward, they can evolve, and they can shift from one topic to another. And in social media, they can be very interested in Brexit today, and tomorrow they may shift their attention to something completely different. So we would like to open the floor for 3 questions. So please, if you have questions, raise your hand. Oh, a foreigner wants to ask a question.
Yeah, good afternoon. Just a simple question. When we mention happiness among the millennials, what do they mean exactly? What are the values underneath? And are those values in the end the same as the older generation, but expressed in a different way? Can they also work in harmony with the political system in China? And are the differences actually massive, or are they in the end quite close, and we're still talking about effort, family, work, nation? Because there seem to be some nationalistic element in what was mentioned, some family context. So at the end of the day, these are still the same values, no?
能帮我们翻译一下？
哦，他就是想这个知道一下，就是刚才我们提到了这个。
The moderator is translating the question for the speakers. So they want to check whether there's differences in the values held by the previous generation and the current generation, or is it just a way the values are, it's just a difference in the way the values are manifested. So what is the difference here? I think we've been discussing that question all along for the whole session. So the value system, because you are elevating the question to the level of value system, whether there's any difference with the previous generation, and also in this political construct, is that allowed, or is it in harmony with the political system? To answer the question, I have to say there is no big difference in the values that were held by each generation. It's just their interests, their consumer behavior have evolved, have changed. But the fundamental, the underlying values have remained true.
You know, the way approach the families, the way to approach a political, being, these are not that much different from the generations before. 因为我觉得说，其实就是
In my opinion, the change is very evolutionary. And in the Chinese context, for it to change fundamentally, it has to take a lot of time. So I think the values of a nation are like the bedrock. So it's usually quite stable. I think it's just the manifestations are very different. Also, I want to add, because of material society growth and because of the age gap, the different behaviors informed by our values are not that different. It's just technology is different and the way we present ourselves is different. And also as individuals, we want to be free. We want to be able to go to a yoga session at 3 o'clock. But in the old days, people want to focus on discipline and timekeeping. So I think that's probably my answer. I have a question. Is this worry warranted? I was born in the 70s. My son was born in the 90s, so a true millennial. So parents are usually worried about their kids. This is very common, and this is universal. So the things we're talking about, are they too worrisome but unnecessary in a way? Because they may not have the baggage from history, but it makes them easier to assimilate and blend in. And this actually gives China a better opportunity to dialogue with the world. And this is actually good for China's rise as a power, and also to the world being a global village. And China has thousands of years of tradition. How we inherit that tradition and how we pass down some of the virtues, like being filial to your, being good to your parents and being good to your kids. Otherwise, if they only obsess over games, they won't be able to get that. game is a virtual world, and it's actually a mirror image of what is real. I have a question to the three uncles. If you were in Beijing, then you address us as grandpas. So what's your expectation of your children? A very simple question. Yes, I do have an expectation of my kid, but that expectation being my kid being a millennial, I have to define expectation carefully because they don't live for me. So I have to respect their choice. Some of their choices may not be my choices. Some of their choices may not be the best choices I think are for them. That's why parents of millennials are struggling, because their children can't get what their parents want. But that's something we have to grapple with, because my mindset is very similar to millennials, so I'm not in pain. My kids are also great. Kids usually have to follow the norms that we set for them. So simply put, what's your expectation of your daughter? I want her to be happier. What about your son? The same. I want him to be happier. In the measurement of success, maybe I can say at the age of 18, I can cut them off. They can survive on their own, and they can survive happily. They don't have to ask money from me. I think it's painful for me. When my son was 10 years old, he told me one day, for sure, I'm not going to Oxford and Cambridge because you talk too much of Cambridge and Oxford when I was young. So it's very painful for me. So in order to honor his word, he didn't go. But maybe it's just a matter of his inability to go there. But he let you know, he informed you very early on that this is not going to be my choice, my destiny. I wrote a book to my daughter, so waste your life on beautiful things that are good. I really enjoyed the conversation, and we spent 1 hour talking about the millennials in China. You can see there's a lot of tension, there's a lot of arguments, and there's a lot of disagreement. And we see that in the audience we have foreigners, we have the older people, we have the younger people. Those millennials were born in peace times, so they had no memory of poverty, and they live in the age of short memory, and they are a good fit for globalization. They are the last generation of the only child, and they spend a lot of time on the phone, 5 hours and 40 minutes per day per young person. So they are more mobile, and they are leading China to the next transformation and to accountability. So they are lighthearted, but they also have to shoulder more responsibilities going forward. Thank you for coming.